Almost immediately after the formation of the Rebel Alliance and the death of Galen Marek, Darth Vader immediately set about attempts to clone him, which, all things considered, did not go well. However, why did this plan fail? Despite being based on Camino, those working on the project seemingly used one of the more common cloning methods found within the galaxy. Although exponentially faster than the Kaminoan method, most were also more inefficient and often led to instabilities even when cloning non-force sensitives, as demonstrated when the same cloning scientists used the technique and the same memory flash-based training on clones created from Boba Fett, intended to be able to be developed, trained, and deployed within weeks, although at the cost of instability setting in within a standard year. However, this part could have alternatively been the result of the template being a pre-existing clone. Although the rapid development time was a factor, it is almost certain that the Force still played a role, as most attempts to clone Force sensitives have resulted in similar unique failures, and the Force seemingly amplified the instabilities that were common with the faster methods, with the leader of Vader's project hyperbolically stating that it was as if the template refused to be cloned, likely due to how the early iterations were not even able to physically form correctly, with one such failure lacking a mouth but still emitting screams, presumably through the Force in some way. Once the physical deformities had been rectified, the most common instability in the clones came from the memory flashes used to train them, with many fixating on specific memories of their progenitor, some mistaking malfunctioning training droids for proxy, others refusing to strike at projections of Jedi the original Starkiller had fought and known. Amidst these failures, Vader attempted to eradicate aspects that had led his apprentice to the light side, by creating a hybrid clone, with one half of the DNA based on Marek, and the other half based on Darth Maul, although the points when Maul's DNA sample was taken, and thus how much of the Sith apprentice's experience would have been imprinted on the clone, were unknown. Although presumably having memory flashes of Maul as well as Starkiller, this clone was trained in the same Jarkai and Shien techniques as the other clones, rather than moves suited for double-bladed lightsabers, as he was equipped with 2 silver-bladed lightsabers. Likely due to the merging of 2 samples from 2 separate species, this clone, referred to only as Maulkiller, had multiple differences when compared to the original Maul. The most obvious being silver skin instead of red, and less defined horns in different positions. However, this clone deteriorated more catastrophically than the regular clones, leading to Vader personally striking him down. However, while this hybrid existed, it struck fear into all that knew of its existence, including Darth Vader himself. After months of failures, one clone, Subject 1138, was showing promise in Vader's eyes. However, after being put through a grueling trial of nearly 2 weeks of isolation with nothing other than the Force to sustain him, immediately followed by physical combat training, the memory flashes began to adversely affect the clone, specifically causing him to fixate on Marek's last pilot, Juno Eclipse, being unable to strike at training droids taking her form, and regularly having debilitating visions caused by memories of conversations between her and the original Starkiller, among other moments. When Vader began to make moves to destroy the most recent failure, 1138 had a vision of Vader betraying Marek for the first time and struck out with a burst of Force lightning to give him time to escape, tearing his way through the facility until he managed to take Vader's TIE Advanced to escape the planet. After this, he headed to Cato Nemoidia, where Vader had previously stated that Kota had been imprisoned, being forced to fight his way through a vast amount of stormtroopers to reach the arena upon landing. Upon first reuniting, Kota ardently believed that this Starkiller was the original, under the belief that cloning Jedi was an impossibility. Somewhat ironic, given how shortly after this experience he learnt that his own Padawan had been cloned prior to the Clone Wars. Although the clone at first rejected this notion, along with his progenitor's real name, after rescuing Juno, he internally questions the possibility of a clone being the one to die on the Death Star, leaving him as the original. However, even if he was the original, it would be impossible for it to have occurred this way, as 1138 had experienced memory flashes from after the original Starkiller's reawakening on the Empirical. In attempts to find somewhere to meditate and come to terms with his creation and how to find Juno, Starkiller experienced visions of the various other clones within the Darkside Cave on Dagobah, Knowing his weakness, Vader attempted to lure the clone back to him by hiring Boba Fett to capture Juno Eclipse and bring her to Kamino. This plan swiftly worked, and when Starkiller returned to Kamino with the rebel fleet, several of the remaining aberrant clones were unleashed. Most of those released were thrown into combat during Vader's duel with the rogue clone, although some were let loose to wander around the facility aimlessly, attacking anything that moved. One of the latter examples was encountered by Boba as he made his way through the chaos of the battle. However, the majority seemingly remained in their cloning pods and were destroyed along with the rest of the facility after the rebels won the battle. Even after the rebels won at Kamino, Starkiller remained conflicted about having to fight the aberrant clones while taking on Vader. After the escape of Subject 1138, Vader focused on training another clone, only known as the Dark Apprentice. Unlike the others, this clone advanced through his training rapidly and was eventually able to separate and compartmentalise the memory flashes of the original Starkiller from his own memories, and as a result, he was eventually deemed a success by both Vader and the project's lead scientist, and was shown the body of the original Starkiller, heavily implying that the one who had escaped was just another clone. With this triumphant success, Vader intended to use him to strike down the rogue clone, a task he had also hired Boba Fett to perform. However, for unknown reasons, the Dark Apprentice did nothing to stop Kota and the other rebels when they imprisoned Vader, whereas Fett refused to shoot the rogue clone after seeing him reunite with Juno. Although his fate is unknown, it is possible that the Dark Apprentice was able to slip away before the destruction of the cloning facility, either on an evacuating Imperial shuttle or using his cloaking device to sneak aboard one of the decoy rebel ships with the intention of rescuing Vader. As both originated on Kamino at a similar point in time, it is possible that the Imperial Saber Guards and Sith Acolytes were created from aberrant clones that were stable enough to function alongside regular Imperial units. At first I thought the only evidence for this came from out-of-universe factors, such as the reuse of sound assets between these enemies and the aberrant clones. The fact that their mechanics seem identical to the clones, and that they're never mentioned again after Force Unleashed 2, there are pieces of evidence within lore, mostly within the game's databank, that suggest it was an intentional choice. In the databank entry for the aberrant clones, one of the reports of the lead clone scientist stated that alongside the one successful independent clone, the Dark Apprentice, there had been successes with two heavily modified breeds, presumably more stable versions of the rambling messes Vader unleashes in the boss fight. Along with this, the Sith Acolytes and Saber Guards regularly emerge from pods within the main cloning chamber while attempting to reach the boss area, all of which seemingly fits with the dialogue of Vader cloning a Force-sensitive army. However, many answers regarding these clones would never get answered, as the cloning facility was destroyed by the Rebel Alliance after the battle, Vader escaped from Rebel captivity before reaching Dantooine, and the fate of the two most stable clones were unknown, along with the fact that the story was never able to be continued. If you're a fan of The Force Unleashed, or simply liked this video, go ahead and subscribe, as I have another video about The Force Unleashed set to release later this month, so stay tuned. If you have any video suggestions for my channel, comment them below, and thanks for watching.